When Israel was in Egypt's land, let my people go.
$100 reward will be given for the apprehension and delivery of my servant girl, Harriet. She is a lot mulatto, 21 years of age.
The slave girl is reared in an atmosphere of licentiousness and fear.
This girl absconded from the plantation of my son without any known cause or provocation.
The degradation, the wrongs, the vices that grow out of slavery are more than I can describe.
It is probable she designs to transport herself to the north. The above reward, with all reasonable charges, will be given for apprehending her.
No pen can give an adequate description of the all-pervading corruption produced by slavery.
All persons are hereby forewarned against harboring or entertaining her, or being in any way instrumental in her escape, under the most rigorous penalties of the law.
My master had power and law on his side. I had a determined will. There's might in each.
Like Harriet Jacobs, the determined will of thousands of slaves in Northeastern North Carolina gave them the strength and courage to seek freedom from slavery. To better appreciate their journeys toward freedom, it is necessary to understand how slavery in North Carolina began in the first place. When the first Black Africans were brought to Virginia in 1619 and later to North Carolina, there were no slave laws in place. Africans were originally treated as indentured servants. Many Africans were given the same opportunities for freedom as whites, as long as they completed their servitude, which typically involved hard labor for 3 to 7 years.
People who lived here spent more time being concerned about protecting each other. And the more people that came and stayed together, the more they could survive. So nobody had time for the niceties of you're black and I'm white and I got more money than you have and so forth and so on.
After completing their 3 to 7 year servitude, some Africans in Virginia earned their freedom and eventually moved to North Carolina, living as free blacks, a status which continued on for their posterity. But as needs for labor increased and indentured servitude became complicated, more people were imported from Africa and the West Indies. By 1715, laws were enacted which made it possible to enslave a black person for life. The institution of slavery in America had begun, as did the all-pervading desire for freedom. The efforts and sacrifices of thousands of people who participated in the Underground Railroad provided a hope and a means to reach that freedom. Misconceptions about the Underground Railroad have influenced society for generations.
Well, the myths and historical inaccuracies about the Underground Railroad are almost legion.
One of the biggest misconception is that even adults think that we're talking about a literal train and a tunnel, and don't realize that the whole Underground Railroad is an allegory.
So the Underground Railroad, really you can think of it as a network, right? A network of spaces, places, landscapes, and people that worked together to bring enslaved people towards freedom.
The essential element of the Underground Railroad were the enslaved people and themselves and the free black people who risked their own freedom, tenuous as it was. It was still valuable to them, and they risked their lives as well. And I think that they get overlooked in most of the literature, and it's too bad, and we need to change that.
pathways to freedom were as varied as the landscape. Thousands of enslaved people in North Carolina used land, waterways, forests, swamps, and hideouts to make their way toward freedom.
Whether we understand it or not, we encounter the places and the landscapes that were critical to Underground Railroad activity in North Carolina on almost a daily basis.
Through the use of runaway slave ads from period newspapers, journals, court documents, and memoirs written by people who contributed to the Underground Railroad, historians have been able to uncover specific locations where Underground Railroad activity took place.
If you've driven, from Raleigh to Virginia, you've entered the Great Dismal Swamp. You've seen it to your left or your right while you're on the highway. And people sought freedom in that swamp to escape slavery. You might have encountered the Roanoke River or the Pasquotank River. People used those rivers to escape.
The North Carolina Freedom Roads Program is a statewide trail system designed to recognize locations that were connected to people seeking freedom. North Carolina has also received several Underground Railroad site designations as recognized by the National Park Service's Network to Freedom Underground Railroad Program.
The National Park Service Network to Freedom program has a broader definition of Underground Railroad activity in that it is defined as the resistance to bondage through escape and flight. So with a definition like that, you realize that Underground Railroad activity could take place anywhere that slavery existed.
Although Underground Railroad activity has been documented throughout the state of North Carolina, the northeastern part of the state and its waterways experienced a high concentration of Underground Railroad activity. The quality of soil from Raleigh and Durham, east and northeast, and then southeast to Wilmington allowed cash crops like tobacco and cotton to thrive. Enslaved people worked farms and plantations in high numbers, and some attempted to escape. One unlikely but effective safe haven for thousands of enslaved people was the Great Dismal Swamp in northeastern North Carolina.
This is a place where they could hide, where a lot of people were not too interested in going in there to get them.
Inhabited by venomous snakes, insects, bears, and bobcats, the original swamp was believed to be close to 1 million acres, stretching from Norfolk, Virginia to Edenton, North Carolina.
A lot of people ran to the swamp. A lot of enslaved people ended up in the swamp, and they lived. They built shelters. They had children, they taught their children, they buried their dead.
The swamp itself was an island of opportunity for the slaves to run away and be free. And some of them lived, married, and stayed in there for 30 or 40 years and didn't come out until after the Civil War.
Just south of the Great Dismal Swamp in Perquimans County lived a large Quaker population. In the 1770s, Quakers were coming to terms with the fact that their principles conflicted with the institution of slavery.
Friends believed that slavery violated the Golden Rule. It's pure and simple. We wouldn't want to be enslaved. Why would we enslave others? And so to be engaged in slavery would be to violate what you said you believed.
Throughout the next 90 years, Quakers attempted to free slaves, only to see them captured and resold. They also helped to send groups of enslaved people to the north or to the free territories, as well as back to Africa. As laws against freeing slaves intensified, Quakers and other white sympathizers worked toward finding ways around them.
The system did not allow slave owners to simply free their slaves. They had to sell them to somebody else. But you couldn't just decide one morning, I'm letting you all go. I realize this is wrong. That was against the law.
Increased pressure came in 1850 with the passing of the Fugitive Slave Act, which required all escaped slaves to be returned to their owners and forcibly compelled citizens to assist in their capture. As time went on, Quakers and white abolitionists of various faiths left northeastern North Carolina, many bringing enslaved people with them to freedom. Their work, in coordination with free blacks and enslaved people, made important contributions to the Underground Railroad in the Northeast.
Quakers didn't run it, they participated in it. Of course, the vast majority of people involved in planning and organizing and working the Underground Railroad were those who were directly affected by it, those who were enslaved themselves.
The waterways in northeastern North Carolina, though treacherous, proved to be some of the most effective means of escaping slavery.
Many people don't appreciate the important role of the sea in the struggle of African Americans to find freedom. From Frederick Douglass on, the sea was a central path to freedom for African Americans. Among the enslaved people in North Carolina that left narratives, that left firsthand accounts of their lives, almost everyone looked to the sea for freedom.
Freedom seeking via waterways and coastal ocean routes were so common that they have earned the collective term Maritime Underground Railroad.
In a way, the Maritime Underground Railroad becomes this other thing.
The dream of fleeing slavery could become a reality with the help of skilled black watermen, both free and enslaved, who were trained to work the waterways.
With everything happening, maritime slaves, enslaved African Americans that are working on the water are involved. They're passing information up and down the rivers. They're planning the routes that enslaved people would escape on. They're educating the slaves that lived on land by spreading news and information.
They knew who was in town. They knew who was overseas. They knew who was up north. They knew who was getting ready to escape. And they just knew everything so they could pass information.
These people were the movers and shakers of the enslaved community. They were treating the institution of slavery and the resistance to it like it was guerrilla warfare. You had to have spies that were out acquiring information. You had to have ways of spreading that information secretly and of moving people around. All that was happening on the water.
Halifax County, shaped in large part by the Roanoke River, is one of the oldest counties in North Carolina and has some of the most documented Underground Railroad activity.
We see the rich history, the stories that originated in these communities as a potential future that would engage people from other areas to come and learn and get close to where that history actually happened.
The Declaration of Independence and the winning of the Revolutionary War didn't bring freedom to everyone. And so the Underground Railroad narratives that we focus on here really help us to tell a more complete freedom story.
In the town of Halifax itself, there was a very large enslaved population, as well as an unusually large free black population, many of which were able to earn money with their highly marketable skills.
The presence of free black people in the South, North Carolina, South Carolina, wherever they were, made slave owners uneasy because the enslaved people could interact with them, which they often did. Sometimes they married. They could see hope for them. You know, if there's an alternative, you're not doomed to slavery because you're black.
The free black population offered, in many cases, a chance, at least, for enslaved people who were seeking freedom to blend in some cases, and pass as free. And we have some evidence that of people who did that for periods of time in Halifax County.
Due to its proximity to the Roanoke River, many local merchants owned ocean-going vessels and traded goods with larger towns. These ships, and an accessible water route provided opportunities for individuals to escape slavery.
One of the WPA narratives is from James Williams, and he escaped in 1835 and passed through Halifax on his way, and he noted that he knew that when he reached Halifax he was nearing Virginia. And he hid out the rest of the day that he arrived and that night in the woods. And then the next day he found an excellent supply of apples from which he supplied himself. And then at that night he reached the Roanoke River and actually swam across the Roanoke River amid a violent storm of rain and thunder, and in a state of complete exhaustion reached the opposite shore.
There are numerous success stories of enslaved people from North Carolina who made it to freedom. Although statistically men escaped more than women, women were the most active participants in the Underground Railroad. 2 courageous North Carolinian women defied expectations and detailed their experiences within the pages of the books they wrote. Born in Edenton, North Carolina in 1813, Harriet Jacobs was born into a family of skilled slaves and free blacks. After the death of her mother at age 6, Harriet went to live with her mother's white mistress, who, despite it being against the law, taught her how to read and write. After her mistress's death, Harriet was sent to live with Dr. James Norcom's family. The situation quickly moved from bad to worse as Dr. Norcom sought after 12-year-old Harriet and harassed her when she refused him. Dr. Norcom continued to pursue Harriet over the years, forbidding her to marry. In 1835, Harriet was sent to work on Dr. Norcom's plantation outside of Edenton. When he threatened to send her children to labor in the fields, Harriet could take no more. She ran away to the home of her free grandmother, Molly Horniblow. In hopes of getting Harriet out of hiding, Dr. Norcom imprisoned her children, just 2 and 6 years of age, as well as Harriet's brother for several months in the Edenton jail. In order to evade Dr. Norcom, Harriet lived in a tiny attic space under a tin roof, experiencing extreme temperatures, insects, and rodents, and unable to stand up for nearly 7 years, possibly only coming down occasionally to stretch unseen at night. At last, in June of 1842, Harriet had the opportunity to flee to the north by way of a ship in her town of Edenton, heading to New York. She used an established maritime route and escaped.
There she was in a tiny attic crawl space for something like 7 years. It's a classic case of the Underground Railroad. She used her relationships with other enslaved women and with free white women to help her get from that attic to the sea. The fact that it was so difficult, that it took that long, is a powerful measure of the obstacles that faced every enslaved person that was trying to escape.
While living in the North, Harriet met with abolitionists and was soon encouraged to write her book, Incidents in the Life of a Slave Girl, written by herself, published in 1861, the year the Civil War began.
It demonstrates once and for all in this country that not only were they literate, but they were creative in how they presented their stories.
Harriet Jacobs' book was once thought to be the first novel written by an African-American woman, until 2002, when a remarkable manuscript came up for auction. Henry Louis Gates Jr. made the winning bid for the handwritten manuscript after learning that it had been stored in an attic in New Jersey for an unknown period of time. It was uncovered at some point and sold to Dorothy Porter Wesley, an African-American librarian who purchased it from a bookseller in 1948 for $85. Once the manuscript was in Gates' hands, he edited it, wrote a detailed foreword to the book, and published it in 2003. It quickly became a bestseller. The original manuscript, entitled The Bondwoman's Narrative, was listed as being written by Hannah Crafts, A fugitive slave recently escaped from North Carolina and appears to have been written in the late 1850s. The 300-page, beautifully written Gothic-style novel puzzled historians. Some deemed it too advanced for an enslaved person to write, especially considering anti-literacy laws at the time it was written.
Laws around enslaved peoples being prevented to learn how to read and write, those came about for a reason, because oppressors saw that enslaved peoples could indeed read and write, and were using those skills to seek freedom in a number of ways.
Others thought a female white abolitionist authored it to gain anti-slavery support.
They didn't know whether she was black or not. They just thought that some white lady had written the novel.
Gates' research led him to believe that an enslaved woman did write the manuscript, but no records existed of a slave with the name Hannah Crafts. Victorian literature specialist Professor Greg Hekimovich soon became involved in uncovering the mystery. After 10 years of studying the text, consulting with experts, and poring over various resources, Hekimovich believes he has cracked the case of the author's true identity. Hannah Crafts is believed to be the pen name of Hannah Bond, an enslaved woman who worked on the John Hill Wheeler plantation as a house servant in Northeastern North Carolina. Historian Dr. Ben Speller worked with Hekimovich to find geographical evidence that would tie Hannah Bond to the locations in Northeastern North Carolina that were mentioned in the book.
What I did was got the Mosley map of 1733, and we found Wheeler Ridge, where the Wheelers first came when they came in the area. They were right next to the Bond plantation. And then we realized that they were the Wheelers that had married into the Bond family.
This geographical connection further convinced Hekimovich of his theory. The John Wheeler family had an extensive library and taught their slaves to read the Bible and Gothic novels like Charles Dickens' Bleak House aloud to family members, which could account for Hannah Crafts' impressive writing skills.
So in doing all this reading, she picked up the style and decided to write her story as a novel in Gothic style.
The book explores various experiences from Hannah's life and details Hannah's escape from her owner, John Hill Wheeler, with the assistance of his abolitionist nephew. Hannah was then said to have become close with the Crafts family in the North, which could explain her pseudonym, Hannah Crafts. She soon married a minister and likely became a schoolteacher in New Jersey. The book is now considered to be the first novel written by an enslaved African-American woman in the country. The legacies of those who participated in the Underground Railroad have influenced individuals for generations.
Enslaved peoples, again, made lives, established families, fell in love, had children, just like us.
And had these individuals not had the courage to seek their own freedom, many of these stories would not have been recorded.
Scholars are still scratching the surface of the Underground Railroad in Northeastern North Carolina. There are more stories waiting to be told and heroes waiting to be uncovered. Their experiences provide important reminders for us today.
When you realize something is wrong, it's immoral, you can, in fact, do something about it.
We can cooperate with others and find a way to redress human rights abuses and improves the quality of human life for others.
Think about what you would risk your life for. There are very few things. And we have found through research, it's documented, oftentimes people were running to love. More than anything, this is about love. I think that is what is at the core of the Underground Railroad and at the core of freedom seeking.
Northeastern North Carolina's rich history is interwoven into the landscape. each place reminding us of the resilience, strength, and courage displayed by women like Harriet Jacobs and Hannah Crafts, and thousands of other men and women who participated in Northeastern North Carolina's Underground Railroad.
Why are ye silent, ye free men and women? Why do your tongues falter in maintenance of the right? God bless those everywhere who are laboring to advance the cause of humanity. When Israel was in Egypt's land, let my people go. Oppressed so hard they could not stand, let my people go. Go down, Moses, way down in Egypt's land. Tell old Pharaoh to let my people go.